Well, all right, we'll get rolling because I want to give everybody enough time to chat with each other. So yeah, just in the chat, if you want to just let everybody know your name, your pronouns, what you do for work, and then just because I'm interested, your favorite way to build rapport with students, and that could be teacher candidate students, that could be if you were a K-12 educator, those students. Just a fun way to see how people are building rapport.
Hey, I'll jump in, even though this is San Pellegrino and not wine.
Oh.
My name is Joan Flora. My pronouns are she, her, hers, I suppose. I am a director of clinical practice at University of Portland. We're celebrating a huge day here today, inauguration of the first layperson Black president of University of Portland. It's huge. So there's a lot of festivities. There's dancing tonight. If anyone wants to come to the bluff and dance, we're ready to celebrate. Right, Deirdre?
Yes, absolutely. It is a big, huge deal. And we're really hoping for some paradigm shifts.
Yes, that's right. And Julia, I know you're here too. So, you know, more of that. My favorite way to build rapport is actually through inquiry and just holding space and listening.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for everybody that was dropping information into the chat. It was nice to hear from everybody. For those of you who were here last week, I just wanted to share this again. Deirdre's here from University of Portland. She's a little bit of a SEL expert over there. She's she runs the only SEL specialization in the state. We have Nancy Markowitz here, and we'll do a little introduction with her. And then I'm Kristen Rush. I work at TSPC looking at embedding SEL into educator preparation. So today we're going to be doing a few things. One, we're going to just do a brief overview of the framework since we have Nancy here. We're going to do any last minute Q&A, and then we're going to do a group activity where we're going to be able to chat with each other, and then gratitude and next steps. Yeah, and if you want to stay in touch with us, my email and Deirdre's email are here on this slide. So yeah, we're lucky enough to have Dr. Nancy Markowitz here. Nancy is the founder and executive director of the Center for Reaching and Teaching the Whole Child. And her work really focuses on integrating social, emotional, and cultural competencies into teaching and learning in all stages of teachers' development. And in her book that she wrote with Dr. Suzanne Bouffard, that book serves as a resource for bringing social, emotional, and cultural competencies into teacher education and into school classrooms. So I'll let Nancy take it from here.
Hello, everyone. Thanks again so much for showing up. I'm not going to talk a lot. I'd love more to hear from you and what you've been thinking about since we met 2 weeks ago. But I just wanted to briefly get us on board with what we had talked about last time. And here's the wheel, which you're probably pretty familiar with. And I want to say, I mean, I've been talking with a lot of people since I talked with you folks, because we see it as, it's not a program. I mean, that's the one thing that's like really, really important to get at. And it's very hard to, because that requires a real paradigm shift as educators. I think we were all brought up professionally, and certainly I was, that you have programs and you implement those programs. And teachers, what happens with them is they then have this layering on effect, you know, like, oh, I've got to do something with SEL. I have to do something with culture responsive practices. I need to do something with trauma informed practices, and the list goes on. And the whole point of what we did in part, was to show how all these things are connected, these areas, and that it's not about a program for each of these things. It's about the way you come into the classroom and how you view things. And that's a paradigm shift. I mean, actually taken to its extreme, that means that with state standards, we wouldn't be having separate SEL standards, culture responsive teaching standards, classroom management standards. It would be organized quite differently. So that kind of gives you maybe a little bit more of an idea of how we think about it. But what it is that by using this, we're trying to help people, educators, to think about how they come into the classroom, how they think about their practice, how they interact with children or other educators, and in particular, what to do. And that's where the anchor competencies come in. And the fact that it's asset-based for both students and teachers. So, I mean, the truth be told, this is really important for administrators as well as teachers. We have concentrated on the teacher professional development continuum because that's the thing that nobody really focuses on. We focus on the community, we focus on the individual, we focus on after school, before, whatever. There's like all these different rings, and Castle does a great job of identifying a lot of the different rings to make social emotional learning systemic. But the one thing that's missing that we've been working on is to say, we really have to look at the professional development continuum. What happens for teachers as they're being prepared for the profession, their first years in the profession, and then ongoing, because that's going to make a huge difference in whether there's systemic change. Next. So I've already talked about this, and I think actually, you know, a lot of this is, I mean, it's for teachers and students. I think I've said it all, other than to re-emphasize that rather than looking at SEL as a road to equity, we see that SEL and culturally responsive and sustaining teaching practices are just woven together, and we believe we shouldn't be separating them, and that using that together, that leads to equitable outcomes in the classroom. Next. So I like the picture of the boat and the land, because it's like however you view things, and really the example I give that was shared with me by a professor was he was teaching a high school class, and there were a group of kids who were kids were all in groups doing work. One group was really loud and they were talking a lot, and his first reaction was, these guys are off task. And I don't know, that would be my reaction too, probably. But if you ask different questions, like, well, let me just not assume that because they are talking a lot and they're louder, that they are off task. I need to gather data that I might not gather if I'm not using this lens. And what he did was he went over and he found out they were just so excited about the topic that they were kind of getting carried away, but they were totally on task. So the only thing was to say, like, well, maybe just lower it a little bit so the others, you know, can hear themselves talk. But that's an example of this perspective taking, and the fact that what we're encouraging teacher educators to do is to use the framework to help candidates to have a different perspective on how they look at their classroom. And it's not how they look at any particular instructional strategy, it's the whole thing. I mean, the kind of strategies that you use are influenced by the perspective that you take. Next. Now that was my brief summary, incredibly brief. But we thought that, like, either in the chat or out loud, and we can turn off the slides in a minute, that if you have been thinking about, and I don't know whether you have, because I know it's the start of the school year and I know what that's like, but if you have had time to think about it, what we talked about last time, your work, the connection between your work and the framework, and what we talk about related to the importance of context, assumptions and beliefs, the anchor competencies and teacher moves. Have you been thinking about it? And if so, any connections that you've made? So you can either, it's lovely to just see everybody and talk in our weird one-dimensional or two-dimensional way, I don't know what, or just share in the chat. But personally, I gotta say, I love hearing from you. So any thoughts? And give it a moment to think.
I've just been thinking about adjusting my lesson plan template to incorporate your lesson plan template so that it has the SEL, the PBIS, the executive functioning, the academics. Because at this point where my students are, I'd like them to both separate them out, but also make sure they're thinking about each of those in their just lost my wording. It's Friday
In the
afternoon.
planning, the instructional
The
planning.
unit they have to do. They have
Oh,
to do
yeah.
yeah.
So your question is,
It was less of a question and more about what I've been thinking about since our
Got it.
last meeting.
got it.
And how I'm going to make that lesson plan template
Yeah.
not feel crazy, but also keep things distinct, because I feel like if you don't have a box for separate things, then we miss stuff. And then when you leave a box blank, it's just a little bit more obvious, at least for the teacher prep component.
Yeah, and it also depends, like, do you have a template that your program uses?
You know what? I actually get to create my own because
That's
my
cool.
program is based on Gen Ed and I'm an endorsement for SPED, so they don't really care if I change things.
Oh, yay. Well, it sounds really good what you're trying to do, you know?
Yeah, I'll see if I can pull it off.
Yeah, well, it's a challenge. I mean, we've had a variety over the years of lesson plan templates that we've used. And now, like, we worked with Cal State Teach, and they have been rolling out our framework within their curriculum. And the Minnesota Unified School District is starting a SPED program in their district. They're getting the states allowing them to offer credential because they're in need of special ed teachers. And so we worked with them to infuse the framework, integrate the framework. And all of that is like, so when they're planning, they have to be thinking about, what am I doing? Am I considering the context? What are my assumptions and beliefs about going in? And obviously when they're doing that, one of the things I always had to tell student teachers was, you're doing this now. And if your cooperating teacher says, this is ridiculous what the university is asking you to do, this is not real life, right? And it's true, it isn't real life. However, it is the development of the rigorous kind of thinking and planning you need to do when you're learning how to teach. So we make a big deal of talking to cooperating teachers about that, because they can kind of like negate the whole thing, So, but it's great what you're trying to do.
No, and I would hope that in the future, as technology advances, that it would not be unreasonable to have some sort of data system that helps you with your lesson planning. So it's more like a drag and drop, but it would actually spit back out, here are the gaps in your SCC, here are the gaps in Common Core, we're not there, certainly, but
wow,
I would love that
someday. Whoa,
someday.
you're way ahead of me. That sounds great. And I love the fact that you used SCC, I gotta say,
Yes.
because it's like SEL is what's used and SEL is not what we are.
No, and I train at PBIS. I'm with the center on PBIS. And what you said about not understanding, it's a framework, not a program, not a curriculum. We have to say that all day long. And so I love the SEC because we're constantly doing that in PBIS. Like, we're the framework. You got to find your SEC. You got to find your, whatever you're going to put in there.
Right,
And I think that's just such a big misrule that I love that it's different letters.
Great.